right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to SJS Writes panel discussion featuring science fiction and fantasy authors. I'm Shawnee Smith, founder of SJS Writes. I am excited to introduce to you amazing panelists who generously accepted my request to showcase their expertise and insights on the science fiction and fantasy genres. I'll first start by introducing our first panelist. Share my screen. Our first panelist is Samerdyke.
Okay. Hi. Pleased to be here, at least on the phone anyway.
Michael Samerdyke was born in Cleveland, Ohio, a fan of the fantastic since childhood. He attended the Odyssey Writers Workshop in 2000. He has written fantasy, a book entitled Toys and Tunes, science fiction, Invasion of the President Snatchers, and horror, the Tales of the Tragonia trilogy that includes the books Land Beneath the Shadows, Lost Shadows, and Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. He has also written books about classic cartoons, such as Wascally Wabbit, The History of Bugs Bunny, and about classic horror, such as the 2-volume Horror Cavalcade, which is a look at the best horror movies and radio and TV episodes of the 20th century.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's fun writing that stuff. I enjoyed it, and I hope people enjoy reading it too. So.
Good. Definitely. Our next panelist is Keith Hayden. Keith is an author and media producer with extensive experience in education. His military science fiction novel, Sirius and Limnic, released in 2021, tells the story of two organizations locked in a bitter struggle for the future of humankind. He is a U.S. Air Force veteran who served 8 years on active duty, then transitioned to education upon separation from the military. Keith is a certified math teacher whose specialties include authorship, music, audio production, and spoken as well as program languages. He is founder of Hayden Academy Collective Studios, whose mission is to help others enter and have success in the creator economy. He currently resides in Okinawa, Japan, with his wife, Joanna. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Our next panelist is Zoe Meschenberg. Zoe is a self-published author who fuses magic with empowerment. Her interests include referencing her favorite television shows, tangenting at 100 words per minute, and showing her readers just how powerful they truly are. Thank you, Zoe.
For once, short and sweet, on my part.
And our next panelist is Nikolai Whissico. Nikolai's love for storytelling began with his wonderful aunt, whose stories made him laugh, think, and just want to read everything that he could get his hands on. His mother also had wonderful editions of the original Grimm fairy tales that he enjoyed as a child. Eventually, he began to read series like The Dragon Riders of Pern, Lord of the Rings, Foundation Trilogy, and The Dresden Files, which set him on the path to being a fantasy and science fiction fan for life. He got the wibbly wobbly idea that he could learn how to write at the age of 16, thus starting a start and stop pattern as a writer for nearly 10 years. After attending the Dallas-Fort Worth Writers Conference in 2018 and making friends, he started to dig into everything writing entails: the characters, the structure, dialogue, and his long-hated enemy, grammar. If you ask some of his critique partners, he seemed to either ignore or have a personal vendetta against commas. Thank you, Nikolai.
A pleasure to be here, and I know I want to add some of your books to my TBR already, just based on those descriptions.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now we will start with the panel questions, and I will share my screen. All right, the first question. Who or what inspired you to become a writer? And the second part, who or what influenced you specifically to write science fiction and or fantasy? And we will start with Nikolai.
All right, I'm going to reverse the order of your questions because that's how it happened for me. When I was in high school, it was around the same time as Christopher Paolini, who I don't know if everyone has heard of him, but he wrote The Inheritance Cycle when he was 16. And that had set, so the simple mindset of, if he can do it then, I can try doing it then. Obviously, a lot of time passed since then, but yeah, that was what really got me to start trying. As far as things that influenced me, I figured out around the same time that storytelling is basically a magic trick. No matter your genre, you're using words in random orders to make people spend their time and invest emotionally. And I always thought it was really cool, and I wanted to learn how to do it. Science fiction and fantasy, for me, are just blank canvases. So that's why I love those genres so much. Perfect examples. I have an ongoing modern fantasy serial called Divine Counseling, Marriage Counselor to the Gods. And my science fiction is a sci-fi comedy called Galaxy Waffles, where a found family survives the service industry in space, ? And the freedom that it allows you is wondrous. And I'll pass the torch.
Fantastic. I love that description, saying that writing is like magic. I love that. Zoe, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I had a feeling I'd be next. It's so funny because I was thinking about it and I realized, there's my emotional answer I will do first, so we get the emotions out of the way, because it will be interesting, and then the more lighthearted. Who or what inspired me to become a writer? It was the fact that my grandmother had passed away when I was only 4. And so every time I had a memory of her, it would be like this sort of, if I wrote it down, I'd at least remember it. And I think that was the drive when I was a kid. And then I think the trauma of that kind of faded. So I like to say it was reading books, but the more I think about it, I'm like, no, it's definitely wanting to remember her. But the amusing part is that the reason I'm doing fantasy is not only because it's my favorite genre, but because I spent my college years learning how people communicate and learning all of these theories about relationships and presenting yourself. And I found it all interesting, but I also realized just sharing it with people wouldn't make it interesting. You can't say, here's this cognitive dissonance theory, and people are going to say, oh, wow, jeepers, that's so helpful. But if I disguise it as a fantasy story, if I write about things that are real situations but put a fantasy magical twist on it, then it's a little easier to digest. And then if someone has experienced those issues, or if somebody has never heard about this stuff, then they have a way of reading it and delving into these subjects where it's not this is how to be a human, but it's also, it still helps them in some capacity, if nothing else. But yes, I happily pass the torch off to whoever is next.
Thank you, Zoe. I definitely can relate. A loved one inspiring you to write, because that's what inspired me too. My father passing inspired me to write fiction. I definitely can identify with that. And then as far as your storytelling, being able to be relatable in order to share an important point. So that's really the essence of storytelling. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Keith, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I don't have that type of story, but it started in high school. I was in this program / class called Colloquium, and the English teacher, she combined kind of literature and history, and we had two teachers, but I remember it was my English teacher, Mr. Kunder. And when I was 17 or 18, I wrote something called Life is an Adventure. And it was just like a little poem or something. And I don't remember if it was for a project. I feel like I did it on my own, but she read it and she was like, you should definitely keep writing. And just from that like little piece of encouragement, I just kept writing over the years. I started with journaling. I journaled for like 14 years. And, at first it was like, I did this today, whatever. And, events and very, not very much going on in the journal. But then I would start taking like risks. I would start kind of turning it into stories. Let me do this one from third person and see how it turns out. And it was just kind of cool. I had a lot of fun with it. So that's where I got a lot of my early experience. As far as science fiction, it's interesting because my first novel, I didn't really set out to write a science fiction story. I just set out to do what Zoe was just describing. Just I had an idea for how wanted I wanted to make some commentary about human society as a whole. And I wanted to impart some lessons to readers. So in that process, I thought about doing what Zoe was saying. Oh, just put your ideas out there, write an essay, write just manifesto, right, or something like that, and force it down people's throats and hope people get interested in it. And then I was like, no, I can do it better. And I can take my writing skills and experience and then make a story out of it. I grew up a big gamer. I still game. Japanese role-playing games were where I cut my teeth. I love story. I'm in Japan now, so it's great for that. But yeah, I wanted to combine those elements into something that was actually fun and that readers could take lessons from. So science fiction wasn't like, I'm going to be a science fiction writer, but it was like, oh, this is kind of turning into a science fiction story. So here I am.
Thank you, Keith, for definitely sharing that transition, just like a gradual progression of the importance of education, like you said before, sparking that interest and then making it continue throughout your whole journey, writing journey, life journey.
Yeah.
Thank you. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, I was a teacher back in elementary school. The teacher, 7th grade, 8th grade English teacher, and he was also the principal of the school. He overheard me and a friend of mine talking about monster movies. And he said, you guys are always talking about monster movies. Why don't you do something about it? And so I ended up writing a play based on the movie House of Frankenstein.
Cool.
And so we did this in front of the class with minimal costumes and stuff like that. And as we were performing it, I realized that everybody in the class who liked monster movies was in the play, and everybody in the audience had no idea what monster movies were or didn't like monster movies. So they're just sort of staring at us like, who are these nuts or whatever. But anyways, that was my first sort of experience with writing. And as around that time I was reading science fiction, fantasy a lot, and I realized that some authors like Robert E. Howard, who created Conan, and then Isaac Asimov and Robert Silverberg, they had started writing science fiction as teenagers themselves and actually getting published and stuff. And so that's one of the things I just got into. It just seemed like, okay, maybe I can do that. And obviously I didn't get published then anyway. But, so I've been writing, since I was in high school, pretty much then, so that's how I got into it. And it just seemed like, this was the genre, the fantastic, fantasy, horror, mostly science fiction to a lesser degree, but that's what I wrote and what I was interested in, and I just sort of have kept at it at various levels of intensity over the years. So,
Nice. Just epitomize the importance of persistence, no matter what someone says, just going with what's in your heart and just continuing on. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Right, our second question, I'll share my screen. So reading and writing science fiction fantasy increases creativity, curiosity, and analytical thinking. How has reading and writing science fiction and or fantasy enhanced your life? We will start with Keith.
Yeah, I like this question because I actually just started reading. I don't know if y'all have heard of Three Body Problem by Liu Cixin. He's a Chinese author, and I just started listening to it on audiobook. But it got me thinking about what science fiction kind of brings to, I don't know, what it brings to the genre and what it brings to my life. I get a couple of things out of it. One, I like the technical aspect. I like when they bring in that type of, because this book, it talks about theoretical physics, and that's how it introduces the eventual like alien landing, I'm guessing. And I'm not sure what's going on yet, but yeah, you learn a lot about different worlds and how people see those worlds and how they imagine them into a story. I love that. Also, from a writing perspective, I like getting ideas from other science fiction novels. I know the gentleman that just spoke, he talked about how he read a bunch of sci-fi and that kind of like, hey, and monster movies, watching those as a kid, hey, you should do something about it, and that kind of, it fuels you. So you need to consume within the genre. So that gives me a fuel, right, when I read other science fiction. And then with the fantasy, I just feel like it's the fantastical, it gives you the room to like flex your muscles and flex your wings and just, hey, I think this is cool to have some, like in my book, I have some just like lasers or something like that, or something that it's just totally out of this world. They have some type of magic system to where it's like they're using computer code to like do magic or something like that. It's a very cookie cutter and planned system, but it's the element of fantastic, right? It's like, hey, I want it in there. I think it's cool, so I'm going to put it in there, So I like that. That's how it kind of, I don't know. It helps me as a writer, helps me as a person, and it's just fun.
Nice. How the technical aspects as far as your creativity, and then just really taking what other people have done and maybe making it better just with anything.
Exactly.
All right. Nikolai, what are your thoughts?
Well, I definitely agree with Keith about the research aspect of everything, because like the best fantasies and sci-fis have a lot of work and effort put into them. For example, Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, he essentially created an entire ecosystem from plants to weather to animals from the ground up, and it thoroughly immerses you into this amazing epic fantasy experience. And trying to think of a sci-fi equivalent. I suppose the simplest one would be Star Trek, because even though it's just technobabble, their characters are so invested in it that you just go along with it. So understanding what you want, how your world works, building it from the ground up is one of my favorite things. It actually was one of my problems as a writer when I was first starting out, because I used to world build more than I'd write. And I think a lot of fantasy and sci-fi writers will agree with that, because whether it's magic systems, races, anything really. You love playing with the way different things to see how they all fit together.
Same here, same issue. Just you could spend forever world building. It's so much fun, but then it's like, is there a story here? What's going on?
Exactly. Yeah, no, Keith gets it. So yeah, that I think how I see things, how conflict occurs, how it develops, and the aftermath is also a part of all that. Because once you set up the world and you fill it up with characters, there'll be advantages, disadvantages, and differences that have to be resolved. So it essentially puts you in the role of architect, or because, don't want to say God because hubris, but at the same time, you are the ultimate architect. And I don't want to ramble for too much longer, so pass the torch.
All right, thank you just for emphasizing the importance, because that's what I've read. Since I'm not a fantasy writer myself, but that's what I read. That's the most important part, is establishing the world. So thank you for touching on that. Zoe, what are your thoughts?
Okay, it's really funny because I had thoughts and then he said Star Trek, which is one of my favorites. So I'm going to have to just take that and just run with that for a second. With science fiction in general, but specifically Star Trek, I feel like it's enhanced my life by forcing me to look at ethical situations and like morals and things like that. Because, I mean, if you go into Star Trek at all, they do things like they do these crazy concepts, and depending on which series it is, it's terrible special effects, but the questions they ask are really solid. And like there's things that they just tackle that I never would have thought of, like how back in the 90s one of their episodes dealt with the fact that in Star Trek you only really see humanoid extraterrestrial species. You don't see other kinds often. And like that kind of like bias of why don't we get to interact with these kinds of ETs and things like that. And I could go on for a long time about that, but I'm going to recenter myself and go to fantasy by saying, because that's my sanctuary for writing, it's made interacting with the world much more interesting. Like I was on a plane the other day being sometime within the last 2 years. And I remember we had a moment of turbulence and a light went off in like a luggage compartment. And my brain was like, oh, portal time. We're about to be whisked off into a new world. And now this plane is going to do crazy things. And obviously it was a joke, but just the fact that it was easy to take a moment that would normally be scary and like, oh my God, we moved in a weird way and there's a light flashing, and to make it more lighthearted and to ease the tension, that is for me, it's very helpful and very fun. Yes, torch has now been passed.
Thank you, Zoe. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's definitely helped me writing science fiction fantasy, because I think the main thing is that it teaches you to realize that, well, things could be different, okay? And sort of not perhaps to get all upset when things change, perhaps. Also, so my day job for a long time was teaching Russian history, and so that's like a different culture that you encounter and have to make sense of. And I'm sure the fact that I had encountered like a bunch of fictional cultures and fictional worlds and stuff like that sort of made it easier for me to, understand some different cultures like the Russian, other East Central European cultures and stuff in our own world, because I realized, things could be different through reading science fiction and fantasy and stuff like that. So I guess I don't want to say it makes you a more tolerant person, because goodness knows you can find intolerant people who read science fiction and fantasy, but it at least opens you up to a lot of different possibilities and the awareness that things can be different, and, not totally go off the deep end when, oh my gosh, people aren't exactly like me or think exactly like me or something like that, so.
Excellent insights. Just to the science fiction genre just shows you, and fantasy genre just show you that, like you said, things can change at any moment, and just allows you to be more fluid as you go through this world. That's ever changing. So thanks to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Our next question, I'll share the screen again. All right, the science fiction and fantasy genres. They are often confused because of their similar characteristics. How do you differentiate between them? We'll start with Keith.
So I suppose when it comes to differentiating, for me, this is just my view, but science fiction deals with the human possible, as I was kind of thinking about, right? It's things that we can create, or we could see ourselves creating. You know, you see this in a lot of the classic science fiction. Y'all mentioned Star Trek. I personally haven't watched a lot of it, but of course I know what it is. But those deal with technology that, you know, the internet and all these things. And yes, we got a question about the metaverse later on, but those are things that were previously like, oh, this is science fiction. Now it's real, you know. To me, that's science fiction. Fantasy is more rooted in myth to me. It's rooted in, you know, things that maybe we would like to be real, but they are not real. They're just, you know, they're made up. Well, they're real in some way. I see Zoe giving me the sting eye. Like,
all I'm gonna say is that Scotland's national animal is the unicorn, and I am done interrupting you.
good point. Good point.
Don't
Right?
forget
If you
the Welsh dragon on the flag.
Right, right, exactly. If you ask certain people, right, and this is the power of story, right? This is the power of fiction, right? These things they don't exist in any reality that we know, right? In our universe, but in the minds of people around the world. I just saw 2 movies this week, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Doctor Strange 2. And these are both heavily fiction stories that are based on fictionalized characters, but hey, to some people, they're very real, right? So that, to me, that's what I think of fantasy. It's things that are, you know, maybe we would like them to be real, but at the end of the day, they're made up. But when you combine them into a genre, you get a pretty fun story. So I don't know. That's just how I look at it.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, when I was at the Odyssey Writers Workshop, this issue came up, and somebody said that science fiction is sort of based on the idea of progress, and that we're always learning more, we're always knowing more, and sort of the flip side of that is that in science fiction, it can go obsolete. Okay. So, like, say, back around 1920 or so, one of the big science fiction writers was Edgar Rice Burroughs, and he had a whole bunch of novels about Mars and stuff like that. And today, people would say, oh, no, don't read Burroughs because, his view of Mars is totally obsolete. And they might say, don't read Bradbury because his view of Mars, The Martian Chronicles, is obsolete. You have some people today saying, well, you shouldn't read Isaac Asimov because, his view of computers, he doesn't really have one. He's sort of, great science fiction writer, but he didn't really anticipate the computer and stuff. So in a way, I don't know, science fiction, instead of eating its young, sort of eats its old, because they can say, well, these guys, they were important way back when, but don't read them now because the science they're based on is obsolete. Fantasy, on the other hand, you keep going back to the same basic archetypes, okay? Like the wizard, the dragon, the princess. You can do different things with them. Like, okay, so the wizard is this wise old man. Okay, so that's Merlin. Okay, but we can say, okay, you have the wizard, but he's like a, teenage kid. Oh, that's Harry Potter, and can tell stories that way. So you still use these archetypes, but you can ask different questions of them. Well, what if the princess, instead of needing to be rescued, what if she was, tough and she swore a lot or something like that? And that takes your story off into a different direction, or, what if the princess wants to run off and be a pirate or something, And so you use the same archetypes, and in fantasy, you don't turn against the past so much, because nobody's going to say, oh, you shouldn't read Lord of the Rings because we know so much more about hobbits now than when Tolkien wrote that, that novel's just embarrassing, so don't read Lord of the Rings, or if somebody did say that, you'd, put them away somewhere or something, or don't read The Once and Future King because we know so much more about King Arthur now than, back when that book was written, So fantasy driven by archetypes, the heroic king, the princess, the wizard, the vampire, whatever. Science fiction, again, based on science, but the flip side of that is that science fiction then can become obsolete as scientific thought that it was based on becomes obsolete, and, that gets left on the wayside there. So that's how I sort of distinguish between the two.
Thank you, Michael, for your thorough explanation.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, I will say, because I can hear the people on TikTok correcting me in my head. Vampires are no longer all the rage. It is now this thing called the Fae. But to answer the actual question, I could do my long-winded, because for me, I can see the lines between science fiction and fantasy blur. The version that I was told recently to help distinguish my own stuff, as well as that's another story, is that science fiction tends to deal with gadgets and technology, whereas fantasy strives to it's like someone was able to move this set of headphones across the room by sheer willpower, versus I pointed a laser at them and with my sonic screwdriver I was able to bring them over here. That's the basic. For me, I'm seeing more and more fantasy where it's a little complicated, like there are time travel elements, or for myself, all of my characters have superpowers. There are no dragons, there are no witches. It's all superpowers based off of your personality. And so because of that, their powers are limited, but they're also not. They're technically magical, but they're also not. So it gets blurry where I sit. But if I were going to have to do a one sentence, it's, does it have a gadget? Okay, it's probably science fiction. There's a better chance of it. But if it's like magic, wands, sheer willpower, words, probably fantasy, if that makes sense.
May I interject here?
Go for it.
Okay. I'm older than all of you folks in this room. But I've read a lot of science fiction, a lot of fantasy, a lot of monsters. I grew up on classic monster movies. And the books are not available now, but I wrote a 6-part fantasy series that was a created world. Now, it has no archetypes in it at all. None. It's just a created world that could have been in 10th century Europe, okay? But I also write mystery and cozy mystery, and they all have a psychic paranormal element. And you use the word paranormal now, and it's like the difference between sci-fi and fantasy. There's this controversy over it.
Yes.
And I think sci-fi and fantasy both are dealing with created worlds, but you're also dealing with, as I think it was Michael talked about, progress. You're dealing with some technology, something. But the things that I enjoyed most about Star Trek were the fact that they were dealing with civilizations,
Yes.
that were dealing with cultures. But that goes back, I have a degree in anthropology, so that's why I do created worlds. And when I even write about contemporary people here with some abilities, I'm trying to create a backstory for them that is part of a created world kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I'll shut up.
Oh, I liked that. But yes, I have finished with my piece. We can pass that torch.
All right. Nikolai, what are your thoughts?
Similar to Zoe and some of the other points that people have already touched on, but actually just I'm going to be ad-libbing this because I literally just thought of this. I think it's in the words. Fantasy deals with the impossible. Fiction is taking scientific ideas and then building from them. Perfect example is FTL. It's a form of propulsion, but is not currently possible. We don't know of any force faster than light, so faster than light travel. If I was in fantasy, I'd just be slicing open a portal in reality and stepping through it, which, you know, impossible, at least in this reality. So I think that really is where it comes down to. Fantasy is the impossible. Science fiction focuses on what could be possible. And let someone else pass it along.
Hey, thank you for the brevity and the brevity in your explanation, and just gotten straight to the point, just based upon, I know it's hard when other people speak before you. Thanks for that. All right, we'll go to the next question. The term metaverse was first used in 1992 by Neil Stephenson in his novel Snow Crash, where he describes the virtual world of a character called Hero, who socializes, shops, and conquers his real-world enemies through his avatar. How do you think the metaverse will affect science fiction and fantasy genres? We'll start with Michael.
Okay. Yeah, I thought about this. So I'm actually called on to predict about something, huh? Okay. So 10 years from now, everybody can say, boy, he really got that wrong. Okay. Let's see. I think it might, well, let's go back a bit to about 1992 or so. People were sort of upset with the science fiction genre around then because, you know, you'd had the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Berlin Wall and stuff like that. And that was something that, by and large, science fiction had pretty much not anticipated. And even more importantly than that, you had the rise of the home computer, you know, and before computers in science fiction, they were, you know, characters like, you know, HAL and 2001 and stuff like that, you know, big, huge things. And suddenly you have home computers on your desk and they're about as exciting and scary as your telephone. Okay. You know, and in some ways, having the computer so close and personal to people sort of demystified it and took it away as sort of like a tool for science fiction to use, I think, you know. And so I think if the metaverse and we become more online and stuff like that, and we, you know, create these you know, characters around ourselves and stuff like that, these avatars around ourselves, I think that might reduce the possibility of people, oddly enough, reading science fiction because, like, they're sort of making it themselves, okay? Sort of like a democratization of science fiction instead of people looking to people like, say, Asimov, Heinlein, Stevenson, et cetera, to, you know, come up with these beautiful stories about what the future is going to be like. You know, it's like, well, gosh, we're using these tools ourselves and we're doing this in our own lives. So why should we really pay attention to what other people are saying about this? So that might sound kind of pessimistic about the future of the genre, but that's sort of where my thoughts went with this metaverse thing. I mean, people will be doing it themselves, and you know, it's not really something that they'll turn to authors for. So that's maybe crazy, but that's where I come out. So thank you. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for your insights. Nikolai, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's already in progress. There's a genre, it goes by multiple names, but it's most commonly known as lit RPGs or game lit. So the premise is that you have a magical world, typically, and you have video game mechanics, levels, items, inventory. On the science fiction side, there's a magnificent series called Dungeon Crawler Carl. Tagline is, "The apocalypse will be televised." One day, aliens came down and just flattened every building, structure, everything we made, created an artificial dungeon with 20 levels, and you go through it, you acquire magic, technology, armor, you have an inventory system. It's basically, it takes the Arthur C. Clarke's idea of technology so advanced can take on the properties of magic to the extreme. So yeah, so it's a reality within our reality. And that's what the genre is capable of. An older example, I think, honestly, would be The Matrix, because again, it's a reality within a reality. So I think that the potential for the genre there is morality and ethics.
PlayStation 3, PlayStation 5, Xbox.
Okay. Because when you're in this reality within reality, what are morals and ethics? If it's all fake, if it's all procedurally generated, then yeah, why adhere to any of the mores or ethics that you've created? Westworld also did this very well. Zoe's reaction, because that is an intense series, especially with the most recent version on HBO. So yeah, I think we're already there. I think that humanity loves its amusements, and that can really show who someone is. And I think I've talked long enough. Please pass it along.
All right, thank you, Nikolai, for your insights. I definitely didn't know about game lit. So thank you for sharing that. Keith, what are your thoughts?
All right. Yeah, Nikolai, I totally like what you said, and Mike too. I 100% agree with Nikolai. I mean, it's already here. It basically, the metaverse, and I've been learning tech and getting into Web3 and learning how to do NFTs and all that stuff, and it's basically blended the genres. I mean, things that were once like, oh well, you know, you did it through a video game, like a proxy, right? When you play a video game, you control Sonic the Hedgehog or Mario, you're controlling a 2D or a 3D, whatever. It looks 3D, but it's really 2D to you. You're controlling them to do something in a game, but it's not you. You know, you clearly see that the character moving along the screen. But what the metaverse has done has turned it into you. It is now, you know, it is you that has only, you know, the avatar can look however you want it to look, but it's your money, it's your life, it's your friends, you know, it's everything like that. So things that were previously thought to be impossible. I mean, I'm just thinking of this right now. Us on Google Meet, you know, like I'm in Japan, you know, I don't know where y'all are, but a lot of you probably back home in the States, you know. So this is something that just, you know, 4 or 5 years ago was possible, but it wasn't to this extent to where I could feel like, hey, I'm having this conversation with X number of people with me right here. This is part of that, like fantasy. What was once like, man, I wish I could talk to somebody over in Japan. You know, it's happening now. So the genres are definitely blending. Zoe mentioned it, Nikolai mentioned it. But I think where I want to add is that there's still always going to be a need for story. And it doesn't matter that you can do all these crazy things. You project yourself into another country, in another time, another place. It matters that there is human context behind it. There's human feeling. And I think, I don't know, maybe this is just the optimist in me. I know Mike took another view, but this is just me. I think there will be more of a greater need to provide context to these technologies. And I've seen that. I'm on Twitter pretty much every day, and I'm on LinkedIn, I'm all these social media platforms, and there is no context for the things that are out there. There's just stuff. There's gigabytes and petabytes of information out there, but it needs to be organized into something that makes a person want to feel something and take action. The metaverse gives us the opportunity to blend these things together, and we have a ton of tech and we can blend the fantastical, but there will still be a need for us storytellers and writers to bring that context, and people that can do it well are going to benefit in the future.
It is true. Thank you, Keith. And then it just made me think of what Zoe said as far as like storytelling is important to really get your ideas and points across. So
Absolutely.
thank you for doubling down and emphasizing that storytelling is here to stay.
And if I just dive in,
Yes.
one of my favorite lessons from college was that a thing can only get you so far. But if you really want to have a foundational, like if you really want something to last, make it more of a why. And I feel like, so I had a friend in college who his senior project was building his own VR. He built a virtual reality thing. He had his own program, headset, everything. The Gamers Club got to test it out just for his, to make sure his presentation would work. And I put it on. And it's fun and it's cool, but then I take it off and it's so jarring because of the technology that's involved. Like my balance is thrown off for like a good 5-10 minutes. I actually felt a little motion sick, and it was kind of like, this is fun. But if I didn't have a real reason to keep coming back to it, I don't see how I would be interested in it. And so even if people dive into the metaverse and get hooked on it for a minute or whatever, or find it compelling, I think it doesn't win out in the end. Storytelling and purpose and things like that win out in the end, because it's just, sometimes it just feels like something's lacking, especially when it's just things and it's not a why. Why am I doing this? Oh, yes.
Thank you, Zoe.
Yeah, I like that about the things, Zoe, like the what. I mean, and I think I just recently saw, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but I just saw this thing called DALL-E that can basically take any written word, like phrase or sentence, and visualize it in any style you want. And this is completely computer generated, and it is amazing. I don't know if you've seen these things, but
Saw an app version of that called Wombo. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So there's different. Yeah. It's basically developing technology, and it's based on neural networks and machine learning and all that stuff. And the point is, like, people were like, "Oh, this is gonna kill the need for painters and artists and all this stuff," and I'm like, "Nah, bro," because like we were talking about, there's no why. It's just a thing. It's a technology. It's cool. It's awesome, but okay, the picture looks of great quality. So what? I mean, when people generate, and I see this all the time because I've experimented with like the AI writing and things like that. When people generate these things, part of the storytelling process, which I think people don't understand, is the creation itself. It's not just the end product. It's not just the book or the movie or the painting. It's, that the person can speak to. Hey, I spent this much time, and this is the backstory. This is why I came up with this. This is why I spent months writing this book, because I was passionate about this or whatever. That matters. And when that's missing, when it's just kind of a finished product, I mean, some people, that's fine. That's all they need. But I mean, I still think there's going to be a place for that entire complete package of a story.
Definitely. Thank you. Move on to the next question. I'll show my screen again. All right, the science fiction and fantasy genres have misconceptions that include: science fiction and fantasy focus on the impossibilities. Writing is easy because all you have to do is have an imagination. Readers are only looking to escape from reality. How do you dispel these misconceptions in your writing? I will start with Zoe.
Oh, these cracked me up because I know that people think them, and as like a 6 or 7-year-old, I probably would have thought them. But well, one, we already have the classic example. I'm totally solidifying myself as a Trekkie, is the whole cell phone and the communicator. That seemed impossible in the 60s. Lo and behold, flip phones come out in the 2000s. They're all the rage. It's the same thing. So I try not to do that example all the time, but that is what comes to my mind. And what I have learned, especially in the last 7 months, is even if you have a fabulous story and a beautiful world, if it doesn't make sense, if it's not compelling, if it's not consistent, people will put it down so quickly. Like, I remember I was like, mommy, I have this cool idea or whatever. And like, she was like, but why is it like that? And I'm like, because it's cool and creative. And so, yeah, no. And then there are readers who do love to escape from reality. And quite honestly, in the world we currently live in, I understand wanting to escape reality. But I couldn't just dive. I've never really been able to dive into a story just for a story. I know people who have. For me, there has to be something to learn. There has to be something to explore, whether that's in like a Harry Potter. Oh my God, Quidditch is a thing I've never heard of before. What does that even mean? How can we make that a reality or whatever? Or science fiction. It doesn't have to be like I learned a new definition or a new vocabulary term, but it's like I want to connect with information and make it meaningful. So for me, sometimes I just want to reread a book that I cherish because I've had a bad day and I don't want to learn anything new. But I find personally, and I've seen in the world, people don't always just want to escape reality. Sometimes they actually want to engage with reality in a different fashion.
Thank you, Zoe. Very well put. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, one of the trilogies I've written, Tales of Tragonia, I took Tragonia is an imaginary country, but I placed it in East Central Europe, and it goes through the various phases of development there. You have the migration of the barbarian, feudalism, you have the Enlightenment, you have Napoleon, you have nationalism, the world wars, the communist system imposed on it. And so, you have fantasy figures in that. Some are werewolves, some are vampires, etc. But then you also, the reality around them, the social reality around them is the reality of the time. The layers of historical development, they all go through that. And so I think it's a concrete example of how, I used history to write fantasy so that it sounded believable, that it had some kind of depth to it. And, the characters had real problems that they had to deal with. It wasn't all just, imagination and stuff like that. And I think, again, that, somebody said they were an anthropologist or that they studied anthropology, and that's what had shaped their writing, that the writer brings his background, her background, what he or she has studied, and that shapes and gives heft and reality to the characters, the problems they face, the stories that the writer tells. That it's not just, gee, I wish, I had a tennis racket and plop, suddenly a tennis racket appears or something like that, for a good story, it's always shaped by reality, what you have studied, what you've experienced in your own life, your own family relationships and stuff like that. That gives heft and depth to your characters. So I think the reality is there. I mean, you have the fantastic, say, bells and whistles on it, but I think readers know when there is a real depth of emotion, depth of expertise, a sense of realism there, and that makes it more believable for them to go along with the fantastic science fictional elements of the story. So that's what I think.
Definitely. Thank you, Michael. Keith, what are your thoughts?
So I basically was thinking when Zoe was saying, I was like, man, she's saying exactly what I'm thinking as far as how I deal with those criticisms of science fiction, right? Basically, I use my background as a teacher to try and put lessons into everything that I write. And that was the basis of Sirius and Limnic. It was lessons about, this is a cautionary tale, kind of, but it's kind of an exaggeration of reality. Kind of like what Mike was just talking about. You know, you've got to have the realism. And my background is military, Air Force. So obviously, I mean, I had struggles putting my book in just science fiction. I called it military science fiction because it's very much rooted in military culture. I know that culture very well. My parents were in the military. I grew up in San Antonio. My mom worked on a military base my entire childhood, and I went to a military school for college, and I'm still basically in the military, even though I got out now. My wife is still in. So it's a big part of my life. And of course, it's going to seep into my writing. So putting that combined with my education background and putting those elements, like really wanting to make a statement about ways to make society better, or just to get people to think about, you know, hey, these are problems that we all talk about or we all think about, but we haven't really found solutions to yet. And they're already, you know, it's already past the point to where we need to start really making active solutions to these things. So yeah, I mean, and to the one criticism I thought about, you know, oh, you just, you know, it's just an escape. I'm like, everything's an escape from reality. I mean, and it depends, right? Just like kind of Zoe talked about, you know, like it depends on the mindset, because sometimes you're in that mindless mood where you're just like, hey, I'm just going to put something on. I'm just going to watch these YouTube videos. I'm just going to read something that I've already read because I like it and I know it's good. I'm like that with food sometimes, by the way. I'm like, man, I got to go with a winner. I can't just experiment. I'm not in the mood, you know. But when it comes to content, just like Zoe said, sometimes you want to engage with reality too. You're using it as a tool. And I talked about Three Body Problem that I'm reading now. It's a tool, it's insight into Chinese culture, into theoretical physics, into the way this author perceives the world. It's a lens shift for me. And I love that. I love being able to get into the minds of other cultures that are way different from me. And that really informs my writing.
Thank you, Keith. Nikolai, what are your thoughts?
As far as science fiction and fantasy focusing on impossibilities, I've got one word: subgenres. You've got low magic, high magic. You've got hard sci-fi, soft sci-fi. And from there, it's like those multiplication trees we were all taught in math. It just subdivides all over the place. And kind of on the addressing the escape from reality, yes, one, there's nothing wrong with that. Two, tropes. There are some tropes out there that are designed to make you cry. So why are people reading that if they don't want those emotions? And as far as not engaging with reality, I believe was one of the points. I mean, you can write it that way, but like everyone else has said, then what point is, or what character or what theme is the reader going to engage with? I mean, yeah, you can write whatever, but if there's not something anchoring the story, then no one's going to read it. And this actually touches on the difference that I've been trying to suss out in my head about the difference between writers and authors. Every one of us here is a writer, sure, we love stories, we love to write them, but an author is a decision to make a business from your writing. You are bound by genre expectations, by cover art, by blurbs and other things that are just inescapable realities. It doesn't matter if you're traditionally or indie published. So there's nothing, and to be completely clear, I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's all a personal choice. Being just a writer means that you will write stories and someone might read them, or you might be the only one who reads them. There's nothing wrong with that. But being an author means that you are writing for an audience that you have to build, especially if you're indie. So yeah, that's another big difference. Sorry, am I missing anything from the question?
It was just dispelling misconceptions about the genres.
I mean, I've heard of people with these misconceptions. I've never actually interacted with one. I don't know. I just don't go to those corners of the internet, or my Google searches don't take me to those places, but whatever. But generally, when I interact with readers, they're there because they want what the genre offers. So, yeah. As far as dispelling them, I'm like, okay, if you think that way, then either are you going to write it different, or would you like to try reading what I wrote, see if it matches up with what that expectation is?
Thank you. I think the take-home message is know your audience, write to your audience.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nikolai. And we're now at the last question. Now let's share my screen again. What current or upcoming projects / events would you like to share with the audience? And we will start with Zoe.
How did I know? It's there's no event that I can think of. No, there is, but that doesn't matter here. What I would like to share is that I've been writing on the down low for like 10, 15 years, but now I'm actually going to put something out there, and it's called, well, the title is called Rabbit Holes and Pepper Spray. It is more fantasy than it is sci-fi, but it's that weird blend where it's like 70% fantasy and 30% sci-fi, and it's multiple perspectives. It follows 4 friends who are whisked away by a magical orange to a dream island where they discover, yes, oh yes, there's a reason, but I can't explain that because that would take 30 minutes. They're whisked away to an island. They discover on this island, it's kind of like, to put it, it's like if gravity on Earth is here, gravity on this island is here. It's not actually gravity, but it's the level of magic. And so on Earth, they get an inkling of their powers. On this island, they realize what their powers are, and then they're able to come back if they so wish, so on and so forth. There's a lot more, but like I said, I would hate to take 30 minutes to explain it because it's a complex story. But if you're interested, it comes out June 14th, and it will be available on Amazon for sure, which is fun, but that's science fiction, not fantasy. But yes, so that's that. I think I answered the question. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or just ask them right now.
Right, how can we contact you? How can future readers contact you?
Well, I am on TikTok frequently, which probably isn't the wisest way of contacting because my technology these days seems to be out of whack. But I have a website. It's my name. It's just zoemeschenberg.com. And then I do have an email for the book series, which So it's Rabbit Holes and Pepper Sprays book 1, and it's the Team Orange saga, which sounds, I wish it had magic in the title somewhere, because then I'd be able to just tell people magic's involved. But I had to write for myself before realizing I needed to write for an audience. But yes, so. And the email would, of course, be teamorangesaga@gmail.com. Ta-da!
All right, thank you
Oh,
so
yes,
much.
it is a piece of fruit. It is not the color orange, just in case, because it sounds weird when you mention it in casual conversation.
Fantastic. The title is intriguing. Looking forward to the June 14 debut.
Thank you.
Nikolai.
Well, first of all, I want to see the cover art for that thing because I can only imagine what it looks like. Also, yeah, I didn't think it was the color because you said it
Good.
magically whisked the characters away, and I'm like, how would a color accomplish that? I mean, not saying it's impossible, but my brain went immediately to the fruit. For me, I'm actually about, I want to say 10 to 15 episodes from completing season 1 of Galaxy Waffles. So I release on a bi-weekly basis. So it'll be about the end of the summer when that gets released. I have a formatter in mind. My editor is going to take a look at it as a one whole manuscript and for it to be an ebook. The artist who did amazing work on the characters is also doing something special that will be available as an add-on for when purchasing the paperback. The more immediately, though, I have a novella that I am going to be releasing in ebook. It's called The Right to Rule. It's a prequel to a series I'm calling The Domain Wars. And in it, we follow 3 separate characters: a bloody warrior, a scholar queen, and the god of crowns. It's its own world and its own pantheon that I've created. And the theme running throughout the novella is ambition, to shape each individual future of these characters. That one is going to be coming out July 23rd, which is also my birthday.
All right.
So,
My birthday is July 22nd. Hey.
June 23rd.
All right. Summer babies.
Mm-hmm. And that's all I have going on right now.
All right. Thank you so much, Nikolai. Michael.
Okay. Well, my birthday is June 20th, so this is really coincidental, isn't it? But anyway, my project coming out in June, I'm going to be bringing out a short book. It's called The Boy Who Walked to the Shadowland, and it's about a kid, like in 8th grade, back in the 1970s, and he's at a sort of stressful point in his life, and he walks into the woods next to his house one day, and he starts encountering sort of archetypes that he recognizes from horror movies. And he walks between the Shadowlands and his home back and forth, and eventually he realizes he's going to have to make a choice as to where he stays. Does he stay in the Shadowland with these new friends of his, or does he, stick to the world he knows? And so that's what's going to come out. I'll bring it out in June sometime. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Keith.
Michael, is that an autobiography?
No, I've never met any horror movie archetypes in real life.
No, it sounds like a great premise, and I've been writing down you guys' works, by the way, just so I can pick them out and see where they're at online. Try and support. So for me, I'm a pandemic podcaster, so like a lot of people, I started podcasting during COVID, and I just haven't stopped. So one of the things that I did was I turned Serious and Limnic into an audiobook. And this is a completely self-produced audiobook. All of the editing, all of the music, all of the sound, all of it. I did it all pretty much myself over a couple of months. And my wife actually came on and did a couple of chapters to help me out. But the result has been a lot more people have listened to my book, have experienced it through the podcast that it's on. I do a chapter per podcast episode. But 7 months ago, I got another project, so I put it on pause for a while. But I've gotten an average of like 600 downloads a month this year in 2022. Like no advertising, nothing. And I've gotten a lot better at copywriting and things like that. And we can talk about that after. I try and help other creatives out with like where I can. But yeah, so this is a big project that everything's all recorded. It just needs to be edited and released as a podcast. So that is my next project, is to finish that. And my wife's been telling me, she's been like, hey, you need to finish. When are you going to finish it? And I'm like, baby, I'm going to finish it. Don't worry. I'm going to get it done. But no, it's not just because of her. I want to finish it too. And I want more people to finish, to experience the story and just to get more experience putting it together and all that. So yeah, that's my next project.
That is really impressive. All of that. Really impressive.
Thank you. And it's available, by the way, any podcast, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, it's all available. And I have a website too, keithhayden.net. All of my stuff's on there. I do a lot of different things. If you go on there, you'll be like, oh, he's a fiction writer too. I don't know. I just do a lot of different things. So you can check it out there. I'm on Twitter, heavy on Twitter at KH_author. And I'm on LinkedIn. Don't sleep on LinkedIn, y'all. I've been on LinkedIn pretty heavily in the past, since February, posting a lot. So yeah, just my name, Keith Hayden on LinkedIn. I'm also on TikTok too. I started taking and talking back in March. And I actually do something different. Like because I read a lot. I've probably read like a dozen books this year. And I read all different types of books, from nonfiction to fiction. So on my TikTok, I talk about books that I'm reading, and I make TikToks about like chapter summaries and things like that. So on TikTok, what's my name on TikTok? I don't even know what it is, yo. I don't even know. But Keith Hayden, look for books. Like if you search it, I don't use the book talk hashtag. I don't do that. I just put books. So if you do that, then you probably find me.
Fantastic. Thank you all. This has been an invigorating and inspiring panel discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. I know once people replay it, they will enjoy it as well.
Thanks for having us, or thanks for having me, and speak for myself.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Enjoyed it a lot.
You can say us. This was awesome.
Yeah, no.
I
Pleasure to
enjoyed
meet all the panelists and people that showed up. And by the way, my brother and his girl showed up. That's Sajani Abdul Khalik. That's my brother.
Hey.
Appreciate much love, bro. Thanks for showing up, man. And Shanna, bless you. Thanks for showing up to this last minute. But my brother's been supporting me. He publishes my books. He's got his publishing company back home. So he's a source of inspiration. I've always looked up to him in my entire life. I still do. I love you, bro.